This is Abe Friedtanzer from the Film Experience, and I'm thrilled to be speaking with Martha Plimpton today about her role in Mass. How are you, Martha?
I'm well. How are you?
Good, good. How did you first hear about this film and what appealed to you about it?
Well, I got a call from my agent that there was this script that one of his friends, not a client, but that one of his friends, Fran Kranz, had written, and there was no budget and no time, but would I have a look? And I did, and I really loved it. I really, really loved it, and I couldn't put it down, and which is rare for me. And so subsequently, I met with Fran in LA. We sat down for coffee and we talked about it. And I wasn't surprised because the script was so good and there was so much of him in it. But I was really pleased to find that he was just as empathic and warm and intelligent and brilliant as I expected him to be. And so it went from there. We just, I said, yes, absolutely. And that was that.
Were you familiar with him as an actor at all?
You know what? I wasn't. I'm embarrassed to say that because, I'm not exactly, I don't exactly live under a rock, so I should have, but I wasn't. So be that as it may, it still worked out.
What can you say about him as a first-time director?
I think there is no one better. I think Fran Kranz is one of the most brilliant and meticulous and thoughtful directors and writers, certainly, that I've ever worked with. I mean, it's very unusual to meet a first-time director who has as much confidence in his belief in what he's doing. He's a man of very few words, which is not usual for a first-time director. I mean, there's nothing against most first-time directors, but I think very often they really, really want to keep some measure of control over what they've written. And there is an element of fear, which, God bless him, there should be. But Fran had worked on this screenplay for at least 3 years, and it had gone through many iterations. For a brief period, it was a play, and then it returned to his original concept of a film. And he had worked on it and studied it and looked at it through the lens of an actor. And he had been so complete in his thinking and his exploration of this conversation, which is basically what the film is, that he had confidence in us, his cast, and Dowd and Jason Isaacs and Reed Birney and myself, to take the screenplay and live in it. And ultimately, we made very few changes. They were very small. And it's all as written. There's no improv or anything like that. And that's just a testament to the meticulousness with which Fran went about this process.
It's funny that you say he's a man of few words. I talked to him last week and I was actually struck by the large volume of sentiment. He has such passion. He gave these really long and detailed, fantastic answers to each of my questions. He just has so much to say. So it's interesting to hear that on set it wasn't exactly
right.
that way.
Well, I imagine that has something to do with the difference between speaking to, an interviewer or someone who's seen the film and wants to know about it, and the dynamic of working with actors where, and in that sense, I think as few words as possible is usually really helpful. So, yeah.
And you mentioned that it was briefly supposed to be a play, and I think it definitely does feel like a play in some ways. As someone with a theater background, did that inform your portrayal at all?
No, and in fact, I'm one of those people who tends to disagree with this. I think in the theater, you'd have to get up from the table more. And I think this film is extremely cinematic and has a tension and a momentum to it that I think would be very hard to capture on a stage when you're sitting, far away and you don't know where to look. In this film, he and his cinematographer really are able to hone in on where they want people to look, what they want you to see. Even when people, if the person speaking isn't on camera, you know what I mean? People's reactions, people listening. A lot of people have this response that it could work as a play, but then I don't feel that it would have the same tension, the same tautness that ultimately needs that release that comes from it being on film, from that tension being created. And of course, the change in aspect ratio towards the end of the film also lends itself to that medium. It opens up in a way that you wouldn't have that kind of control in a theater. It has that, and I hate to use the word intimacy because of course theater is always, you think of it as being very intimate, but I think this film has an intimacy that is almost on another level.
I agree. And I think a big part of that is you and your co-stars. And I'd love to just speak about each of them. I don't know if we want to, I don't know who, if you think you interact more maybe with Jason or with Anne, who would you start with?
Well, I mean, I think it's really hard to pick one because we're all sort of a unit. Do you know, the film functions as an ensemble. And so for me, there's no way to sort of say who I interact with more, or, do you know what I mean? Every single actor and every single character around that table has equal value and tells the story, which makes the whole. Do you know what I mean? So it'd be really hard to pluck one out and say, but I will say each one of us had our own wonderful qualities and gifts and personalities that we each brought into the room, and we became extremely close. I mean, really, really close during the 8 days that we shot this film, or at least that we were around the table.
Have you heard any surprising reactions to the film that you didn't expect?
I'm not really. I mean, I think of this as I'm very proud of this movie. I think of it as a very brave work. And I think of what Fran's done with this film as a very brave thing to do. And so I've been incredibly moved by the responses that the film has received from people all over the country. I won't say that I'm surprised by any of it, but I am moved maybe to think about it in different ways, from different perspectives, and I'm really, it's a very powerful thing. It's hard to sort of describe, I think this film is very unusual. This film has put me in touch with people, or with people's emotions at any rate, that are quite deep, quite personal. And to hear from those people is really very moving. This film is very much about change. It's about learning how to move forward when you are in a state of stasis because of grief or anger or rage or terror or loneliness. And these aren't concepts that are easy to talk about. But this film, on some level, I think, is a demonstration of what is possible when we really sit and listen to one another, when we really do allow the space to listen. Does that make any sense?
Oh, absolutely. And I know Fran spoke a lot about the fact that these meetings are something that do happen in real life. He was very surprised to learn about it. That was something he didn't know. And that it is really a very unique space in some ways where everyone is sort of there on equal footing.
Mm-hmm.
obviously the film, it was a success, and what you're saying makes sense. Were you apprehensive beforehand about the idea of tackling this subject matter?
No, um, I didn't look at it from that perspective. The film is not terribly political. It doesn't really, it doesn't really try to be a polemic. It's not a film that necessarily is about the politics of the issue. It's, I wanted to do it because it's not, because it was so unusual to me. It wasn't an exploration of violence from one person's perspective. There were no flashbacks of the event. There are no close-ups on the photographs of the family members. There, it's a film about process, which very few films actually are about. It's not a film about a thing that then gets resolved. It's a film about, the process of moving through grief into grace. And so that was something that I felt really strongly. It was also like, reading it was like a piece of music to me. I felt like it was almost like a musician could look down and look at a symphony and look at the notes and read through them and see where, things go and where they rest and where's the recitative and where's the, whatever. That's what it was like to me. And I wanted to have the experience of working on something that way.
And I think that point about no flashbacks is important, because the two films that I think of most in comparison to this are Rudderless, which William H. Macy made, which was at Sundance a few years ago, and The Fallout, which just premiered on HBO Max. And I think that those two are both very moving films as well, but they do deal a lot with what actually happens and with either just parents or just kids trying to move on. And I think the fact that we're disconnected from that and just in this moment, in this space, I think is very worthwhile and also unique.
Thank you. Thank you.
So, and of course, you've played a lot of mothers before, sometimes in not such serious roles like Raising Hope. And the one that I think about most is a show that I really enjoyed you on, which I'm sad was canceled, and that's Generation.
Oh, thank you.
Which it's hard to believe was also 2021, I think, in its entirety. A long year, obviously, but I'm curious what you can share about working on that show, and especially with the success of something like Euphoria. Why do you think this show didn't make it?
Oh, who knows? One can't really speculate about that sort of thing. But I love the show myself as well. I think it was an absolutely beautiful show about something that we don't often see, which is kids just being kids and not necessarily the tough part of being queer, but the good part and the just that queerness is normal, and I loved my character so much. I loved her just oddness and her love for her son, which came out in very strange ways. I loved working on it. I really loved the writing, and I'll miss it too. I really will, but I'm glad that it was on for one season. I hope you can still see it. So yeah, I'm very proud of that show.
And you've had lots of roles in your career. Is there anything that really stands out for you, or something that you find you get recognized for most?
Oh, sure. I mean, Parenthood, The Goonies, Raising Hope is a great one that people actually know about Raising Hope here in the UK too. So that's really cool. The Good Wife, yeah, there are lots of things. I mean, I've been doing this kind of a while, so yeah.
And aside from Mass, what impressed you in this last film year that you saw?
Oh gosh, I loved West Side Story. I really loved it. Really, really did. And gosh, I'm trying to think of what else I've seen this year. I haven't been to the theater much at all, really, unfortunately, I hate to say. But I loved West Side Story, and Ariana DeBose is a good friend, so I'm always rooting for her.
That's great. And do you have anything coming up that you can talk about?
I do. I'm here in London. Well, it's going to be a while because we're just beginning production now, but I'm working on a show called A Town Called Malice for Sky TV, for Sky cable, something, whatever it is. And I'm really excited about it. Yeah.
Wonderful. Well, it's really, really great to be able to speak with you and to learn more about your attitude towards this film. And I will encourage anyone watching to make sure to watch Mass. Also, while you're at it, watch Generation. And thank you again for taking the time to speak with me.
Thanks so much. Take care.